Hello everyone, welcome back. It's Friday night, another episode of Live Ghost Stories by the Fireside. Got the fire going, got Instagram cosplay, and is it still Bubba Egg Roll? Bubba Egg Roll joining us in the house tonight, well, outside of the house. I hope everyone's doing well. So, let's talk about this for a second. I'm just talking about with being outside of the house. Now, one of the best things about outside of a house, and if you remember the story from last week, was about a field. Again, this time we're going to have a small thing. It's not going to be a Stranger Things type deal, as much as this time is going to be the theme this week. As we're thinking about fields, maybe even horses, and things that happen in the wake of such. And our first story takes us back close to the turn of not the millennium, but closer to the 20s that everybody said roared. Now, at this time, during this time, the way from, like, Valdez and Granite Falls to, say, Winston-Salem would not quite so simple as jumping on 321 and making a quick hit on the interstate and going down. Instead, a lot of your roads were more like back roads, and your Model Ts were the car of the day. So, let's talk about this. Now, this first story is the legend of Lacey Road. While it does not take place on Lacey Road, it involves the family and members of people that are related. This story is chased by a fiery steed. Now, you'll be able to catch this later when I post it up. But chased by a fiery steed. You see, Randolph and Agnes Hebner was coming home from a long day at Winston-Salem. And, you know, like I said, at this time, with the road, your highways being more like back roads, a trip to Winston-Salem was more or less an all-day trip, there and back. And they had spent the day handling some business, grabbing food, just enjoying a day out. And as the day persisted and began to wane, they found themselves driving home. They had begun to near the Catawba Valley around the time that the sun was hovering just over the horizon, and it was still a good 2-3 hours maybe from that side of Catawba County to back to Valdez where they lived. Now, in this whole sense, the car was going down. They traveled on, they made their way into Hickory, and by the time they got back down the old Brookford Highway into Hickory, it was dark, it was getting late. They were tired, exhausted from the day, and decided that they would go to my grandmother Hebner's grandmother and stay at their house for the night. Well, they were always welcome to stay in, so, you know, as they fought to stay awake and got down to the drive that pulled off and snaked down along like a small woodland area and brought them up to the old house, the old farmhouse that was my great-grandmother's home. They saw that the lights were off and figured, okay, maybe everybody has gone to bed already. Well, they got out, and they went up, and the first thing that Randolph did is went up and knocked on the door. Well, they waited, and they heard footsteps, which, typical, they heard footsteps. Somebody come up to the door. The curtain pulled back and looked outside like somebody was looking outside. There was nobody there. And just footsteps went on back down the hallway. Gave it a few minutes, and they decided again, knocking on the door. Well, again, they heard the footsteps. They saw the curtain move as if somebody was looking out. And they went on. So they, finding it rather odd that maybe while they might not have seen, they went, fell out under the rug, found the key, unlocked the door, and went on in. Which, was something that was a given. This was something that was known that they could do. So they went in. And it was strange that even though they'd heard nobody was home. Nobody seemed to be at home, or had seemed to have been at home for a while. So, not really sure what was going on. They went ahead, got their luggage, went inside, and decided to go ahead and stay in for the night, and then they could start again on their journey in the morning. Well, the night went kind of rough at first, because while they were laying there, they kept feeling something tug the sheets down, and they'd pull it back up and they'd tug the sheets down. Well, as that started to dissipate later on the night, they were awoken by the sound of a horse in a frenzy. Now, the horse sounded like it was just racing about, just crazy. And so what happened? So my grandfather got out of bed. Randolph got out of bed. And he looked out. And tearing across the field was a solid white horse. Now, solid white horse would be all fine and well. Except unlike other horses, with each breath this horse took, a gout of flame would come from its nostrils and its mouth, and it was just racing about like mad. And it, to his horror, it was making its way toward the house. And they got their stuff, and they started getting up and trying to get out, and the horse started basically pacing the house. And it chased them, and it got to the car, and it was able to get in the car and get down the road, and the horse proceeded to chase them, its flame-breathing jets just going off behind them as it chased them down the road all the way to the end of the thing until they were back on the highway. They pretty much went home. This isn't the end of the story. You see, several years later, when Interstate 40 was being put through this location, a motorcycler decided to take his motorcycle off-road and started driving down through that area, when all behind him come a white horse, which was breathing jets of flame, and it stayed and paced him right at his back. And it chased him until he decided to try to lose that horse. He drove in through the house, and looking back to see if it was there, see if the horse was still behind him, he hit a piece of furniture and flew over. He woke in a hospital a few days later. His jacket, a solid leather jacket, had been burnt completely off of his back by the flames of the horse. And that was chased by a fiery steed. Now, since we're talking about fields, the next story that we're going to talk about is an adaptation of Alvin Schwartz's Scary Stories, which was The Thing. Now, because I'm trying to bring this from memory, there will be variations, including in names. So bear with me, and I hope you enjoy the story. But before we go, the quick intermission. Clint, you want to say hey?
Hello, everybody. I remember that story that he talked about, the flaming horse. It's probably 30 years ago, probably at least. You told me.
It's been at least a good, as long as you've known me anyway.
Yeah.
And then Boba Egg Roll sitting here enjoying the night.
Yep.
Speaking of flames.
Now, Clintstagram, if you follow him, you'll know him as Granite Falls Deadpool, and you'll know him as Cable, and
Hawkeye Ronan.
Ronan, Hawkeye, whichever one you want to go by with that. And if you look close, he could easily pass for Jeremy Renner in that. So he does very epic with his cosplay on this. And then Bridget has been debuting her Mandalorian. So,
Which she got a new kit we're trying to paint.
Yep.
oh, sweet,
Yep.
sweet. Very good.
Kind of slack.
All right, now for The Thing. John and Jerry were walking home one night, and on the way to John's house, there was a huge field out by the road. Well, as they were walking, they saw at the edge of the field the form of a man standing there. The man was tall, he was gaunt, and at first they thought it was just an ordinary person, just standing, walking, maybe even lost. They weren't sure. But as they got closer, they realized something was incredibly wrong with this person standing there. And it was as if it was watching them. And they had no choice. They had to walk past it to go on by John's house. And as they got closer, they could see in the shadows of the evening that the features of this person were sunken, and the eyes sunk deep back in the head, and it had almost a corpse-like appearance. And as it just looked at them and just watched them just cold, dead, and even started to take a step toward them, they took a deep breath and began running as fast as they could, leaving the thing behind. And they kept looking back, but it was there. And then they pressed harder, ran, and when they finally got home, they realized it was no longer there. And they wondered, what was that dead-looking thing that they had seen? Well, time passed, and every once in a while, the thing that they saw would come up in conversation. Joe managed to turn around and got sick later in the year. And he passed away in the hospital. But Jerry said noticed that when he went up to see his friend laying in the coffin, he found an eerie resemblance between his friend Joe and the thing that they had seen in the field. Alright. And that concludes The Thing. Again, like I said, this is adapted from scary stories and folklore. So, and in that, you know, it was one of them things that sometimes we see things out and about that we don't normally understand, or we can't comprehend. Science can't explain it, and people will try to brush it away with, "Oh, it was just imagination." Yeah, nothing like that can happen. You were just seeing a twig, or you were just seeing a tuft of corn,
Or you just heard something growl.
or you just heard something growl a couple of feet away. But then every once in a while, something crazy will happen out in the field, and two people will see something, and they'll share the drawing, and the drawing, despite differences in drawing styles, will be the same. Much as what happened to myself and Clint one night out in the field. Remember I told you we were pseudo-camping. Stacy and I were pseudo-camping. And we had been talking about what happened between Clint and I in the field a couple of weeks before. Well, this is the story of what happened a couple of weeks before. You see, Clint and I were pseudo-camping out in the field. Now, again, if you're not familiar with pseudo-camping, it's like camping out, except you got all the comforts of home just up the hill or out the edge of the backyard, or you're still sleeping out under the stars. You don't have the nice, friendly campfire like you would here. Or you wouldn't, and you don't get to, you don't have the marshmallows and all that. You basically eat dinner and you go out and you stay out under the stars. Well, Clint and I were staying out in the field that night. Now, you will know this story if you've read The Legends of Lacey Road, of the peculiar case of that which dwells in the field. Well, Clint and I were staying out in the field that night. As before, we had eaten at the house. I can't remember if we had pizza or if it was...
It was more than likely, probably.
More than likely. That was like the food of choice when the friends were over.
Fish camp, probably.
Of course, there's some of the people who know me who would remember hot dogs. So, but for the most part, we had finished eating pizza. We had played Nintendo up until it was time for Pop to run us out of the house if we was going to stay. Yeah, pretty much. Turn it off, it's bedtime, boy. Yeah. But, in memoir of Pop. But yeah, he would pretty much tell us, "Hey, it's time to go out." So we'd
sleep out in the yard.
Time to go sleep out in the field, yeah. We'd go out and get our stuff and go down. And I had this old lantern, and it was like an oil lamp, but it was a lantern that would guide us down into the field. Yeah. And we would use that to light the way. It's the same lantern that was mentioned in the story about when it saw him, it growled and ran.
They wouldn't use flashlights. You just like real light lanterns. That's cool.
But we had got down there and we were enjoying the night sky. Clint and I always like to talk about the constellations, stars, mysteries of the unknown. I mean, we were.
Just what if?
Yeah, there was a lot of what ifs and whatnots, and just we had some great times, great conversations, and so it was that night.
What was that?
That's what I'd like to know. And so it was that night. It was great conversations. We had an awesome time, just sitting, enjoying ourselves. Well, later on the night, probably around 1, 2-ish in the morning, when the moon had passed its zenith and was on its way down, Clint and I was messing up around close to the house, where an old shed used to be, and where the driveway was, and we were just walking around and talking and things, when we looked down in the field. and both of us saw something, and it stood upright, and it was dark, and you could see where the moon had, pretty much had a highlight on its back. It was just nothing natural about it. And as we sat there and looked at it, and by the time Clint and I could look at one another and regard to one another, if he was seeing what I was seeing, and if I was seeing what he was seeing, and we looked back and it was gone. Well, on this occasion, we actually packed up our stuff and went back in, or we left the stuff out there. We just packed up what we had with us and went back inside for the night.
Oh.
But in the meantime, because at this time Clint was a huge skeptic of anything.
Yeah, I was skeptic.
I mean, but as Clint and I were sitting there getting everything back together, we decided, since Clint was a skeptic and I was pretty sure of what I saw, he and I decided to sit down on opposite ends of my room. He took a piece of paper. I took a piece of paper, and we both grabbed the pencils and started drawing out exactly what it was we saw. When it was time, now neither one of us saw what the other was drawing.
Right.
But when it come time for us to share alike, we put our cards down at the same time. And again, except for the differences in just drawing styles, both pictures were the exact same thing. Neither picture varied in detail other than artistic drawing styles. We had both seen that which dwells in the field, and it had been seen on multiple occasions. Now for the final story. Angela, this one, you said I ought to go ahead and tell it, so I'm going to go ahead and tell it. This one's one I don't think I've ever told you or anybody else. It was a night when Mom, Pop, and them had went to see Roy in Kentucky. Matter of fact, it was the weekend I got a crap ton of Dungeons and Dragons stuff in because Mom and them found it, but I had stayed home by myself that weekend. A storm had rolled in. Now, granted, I was watching Bram Stoker's Dracula because I watched that movie religiously. So, but here's the crazy part about it. It was late in the night. That house, you always know how that house had a tendency to do things when nobody was there.
Oh yeah, you hear it, so.
Well, the lightning was flashing out in the field, and I was just looking out across the field from the window, looking out over the front porch. And everything was normal there for a while. But then at one point, the lightning flashed. And there was a white figure standing down near the curve area, just standing there. And as the lightning would flash, you would see the lightning just play across it. Like you'd see the highlights of the lightning just flashing on it. And it stood there, and it was almost like it and I were having a stare-off for several moments. But
how are you all?
Good.
Good. I know I'm interrupting.
But
fine.
You're fine.
Just wanted to say hello.
That's all right. Anyway, after what seemed like several minutes of this white-robed form, it wasn't a white form like it looked like it was wearing robes, like a cloak or robes, and it was standing there in the rain in this torrential downpour
So it was
with
on
the
right on
lightning,
curve.
and it was down in the field near the curve, and it was standing there. I mean, it was just, the dogs wasn't paying it any attention, but I mean, you could just see it down there. Then a lightning flash come, and as soon as the lightning flash come, it was gone. And that was one of them things that was just, it was one of them instances where I saw something that was almost too weird for me to mention. So, because there was a weird vibe I got off of it. But I never wanted to talk to anybody about that I recall telling anybody about that, except when I was telling Angela about the story last week. But that was almost like the same weekend when the house went crazy, which will be another story. So I hope everyone enjoys this week's live ghost stories by the Fireside.
I'll be here again.
All right, that's awesome. And if it's not here, it'll be at my house. So and we'll do it that way and enjoy being a part of the Halloween series that's been going on since September. The final episode will be on the Friday before Halloween. What story is that one going to be?
I'll be off that day.
Here's a good question for you. Is there a story you want to hear told? Is there a story you want to hear? And this doesn't have to be a legend of Lacey Road, but is there a ghost story you want heard? Or retold? Yes, thank you. Put it in the comments below. Let me know. I'll be more than happy to do what I can. And I've enjoyed having everyone again. Clint?
See you next time.
Bridget?
Hi, see you next time.
Alright, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy spooky season. Halloween's not much longer away, and man, our fun time's ticking down. The veil's growing thinner. Be on the watch out for whatever you might see. Might even make a good story for next time. Have a good week. See you in the shadows.
Whoa.